The entire contents of this podcast and website are based upon the opinions of Tammy Garcia and her guests, unless otherwise noted. The information on this podcast is not intended to replace a one-on-one relationship with a qualified healthcare professional and is not intended as medical advice. It is intended as a sharing of knowledge and information from the research and experience of Tammy Garcia and her guests. This is the Naturally Inspired Podcast, coming to you from our 1890 homestead in Johnstown, Colorado. I'm Tammy, and I want to thank you for joining us. Let's get started and help people feel good so they can do what they love for longer. Today on the Naturally Inspired Podcast, I had the opportunity to sit down with Sherrie Peif. Sherrie is a journalist for the Independence Institute, Complete Colorado, and Simply Sherrie. She has over 30 years of experience writing and reporting the news. It was a great opportunity to sit down with Sherrie to get her perspective on just the state of the media these days. One of my favorite takeaways from this podcast was when Sherrie talked about fake news and how we can kind of decipher fake news and what fake news is. So very valuable information here, and I hope you will all enjoy this episode of Naturally Inspired Podcast with Sherrie Peif. Thank you so much, Sherrie, for being on the Naturally Inspired Podcast today.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. I've been waiting to talk to you for a while because I think we all kind of feel this way. What in the heck is going on?
We do. It's crazy. And there's, I like to think that there's three different groups of people right now. I don't even know if I like to think it, but there is three different groups of people right now. There's a group of people who have, everybody needs to stay home, not leave your house, eat with the food that you have, just hunker in place for a few weeks, and we'll get through this, and COVID-19 will go completely away.
Right.
Then there's the group of people that are like, this is stupid. This is no different than the flu. We need to just go back to the way we were in January and let nature play its course, and we'll all be good for it. And then there's that middle group, and that's kind of like where I like to put myself.
Yeah.
Where I think most of Americans are, even though many Americans still are still afraid to admit it. But there's that middle group that says, no, this is a real problem, and maybe not necessarily a real problem in the virus part of it, because I do think that there is some truth to it's a virus, and we're going to have to learn to live with it.
Yep.
And some people are going to die from it, and I'm very sorry about that, but it's no different than some people who die from the flu and some people who die from pneumonia.
Right.
But the problem with it is because it's new, it can overwhelm the hospital system very quickly.
Yep.
And I understand that, and I understand the need to social distance and to even wear masks. I wear a mask when I go into public, and all these other things. And so I think there's that middle group that says, we see that there's a problem, we see that there are things that need to be done, and we're willing to help you do those. However, that doesn't come at the expense of our economy. We need to be able to work. We need to be able to breathe and go to the mountains and go to the golf course and go to the tennis courts. Because as a society, we can't stay locked up even for very much longer, because then we're going to start to see domestic violence problems, suicide problems, all the other problems that come along with poverty. So,
which we're already seeing an increase in that. Right.
Absolutely.
So the people that I'm in connection with who are working on the front lines, specifically in hospital, administration and that department, admitting people into hospital, they're seeing the numbers of domestic issues rise, and drinking, alcohol related accidents, because people are self-medicating at home.
Mm-hmm.
So they're seeing a huge rise. And of course, alcohol relates to domestic abuse and other abuses as well, for sure. But just the alcohol related incidences of falling down.
Right. Well, yeah, because people, if you think about, not to go into grave detail, but my ex was a functioning alcoholic. Right. And you think about the number of functioning alcoholics that are out there
Yep.
who during the day go to their job, do their job, don't drink, whatever. And then the minute they get off work, they go home and they have their 6-pack, 12-pack case, whatever it is that they drink.
Yep.
And then they start the cycle the next day. Well, now they're home all day and they're trying to work from home. And so that level of alcoholism has gone up, and who knows what it's like when they're home at night with their other. So it is a real problem. And I'm sure it's driven a lot of people to drink as well.
Yeah. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah.
Social
People who may be
drinkers
social drinkers
Yeah.
are now, drinking more frequently because of this added stress of the mom who is still an essential worker and goes to work every day and works a 10-hour, 8-hour shift and comes home and has to educate her child. I mean, there's so many reasons behind this.
Right. So I want to get into a little bit of your background, because in those 3 groups, that middle group you're talking about, I think there's a portion of that middle group that swings back and forth because of certain news stories they read, or they have an interaction with someone personally that has had an interaction with COVID, or something, on a day-to-day basis. These people are kind of swinging back and forth as well. And so what I want to get out today is how we can kind of discern information in the media correctly. Right. And you have a lengthy career with media, and I always find your work to be so, just truthful.
Thank you.
Really are, true to what to the facts. And you're not trying to sway anybody's opinion, and you make no apologies for who you are and what you believe in. And I think that is, slowly fading away right now. I mean, it has been for a while, but right now it's so important. And I don't think we're ever going to control how the media, spins stories until we ourselves learn how to discern what is a good story. And so I think we have to start with the education of people, and how to discern your information, and how to, what you're looking for. So give me a little bit of your background. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Greeley. I'm a 4th generation Colorado native. Oops, and I'm sorry, of course my phone is going to ring. I grew up in Colorado. I'm a 4th generation Colorado native. I'm a 4th generation Weld Countyite. Grew up in Greeley, been here all of my life, and went to Greeley schools, graduated Greeley Central High School 1986. Go Wildcats. And that's where I've been. It's kind of one of the reasons why I think I have so many contacts and know so many people.
Yeah. How did you get started in journalism?
So if somebody would have told me back when I was in college that I would be a writer in any capacity, even messaging, I would have laughed.
Really?
Language arts was my worst subject. I remember my very first day when I was freelancing for the sports department at the Tribune. I went in after a game and I sat down, and across the table from me was another freelancer, and it happened to be one of my high school language arts teachers.
Oh,
and he looked at me and he started laughing.
You?
Okay, never in my wildest imaginations would I've ever expected you to become a professional writer.
That's hilarious.
Right. So when I went back to college, after my son was born and I left my ex, I decided to go back to college. And when I was in college, I had to go through remedial writing courses. My writing was horrible. And so I went through all of the 098, 099, 09, and my language arts teacher at Ames Community College was phenomenal. And she said to me, when I finally got into like freshman language arts, she said to me, have you ever thought about being like a journalist or a writer of some sort? Because I really think you have some great writing skills that you just didn't realize you had. And at that point, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I just was out for my AA. And so I thought about it, and I took a few journalism courses at Ames and fell in love with broadcast media.
Right.
And decided that was the direction I was going to go. So I graduated Ames with a broadcast media degree, went down to Metro State, was a broadcast media major, actually free ride college scholarship to Metro State through the Academy Awards folks, and got about 3 months into my stint at Metro State, and I was doing some internships at a couple local television stations in Denver, and realized that I was not cut out for broadcast media. decided to go the print route. It was very cutthroat, and I just can't do this. I'm the type of person, believe it or not, that really does want to make everybody happy.
Right.
I know that sounds strange coming from me, but it really is who I am.
No, I can understand that.
And I just couldn't do it. So I went into print, and that, I guess, like they say, the rest is history. And I lived in Greeley, and I always wanted to work for the Greeley Tribune. And I did an internship at one of their sister papers out in Windsor at the time. And within a year or so, I was hired on full time at the Tribune, and spent 15 years at the Tribune before I ended up where I am now, which is Complete, Colorado.
Really? That's a fascinating story.
Yeah.
Another story because, you never know what you really want to do until you get out there and start trying things.
Right, exactly. And, when I was going to Metro State, I was driving back and forth every day from Greeley. And I grew up in a very liberal household. My mom and dad were staunch Democrats. And I remember going to school in the morning, and I loved to listen to talk radio, but I've always been the learn person.
Yeah.
So I always listened to opposing views. So I would listen to Mike Rosen on KOA radio all the way to school in the morning. And on my way home, John Caldera did a stint. And so I would listen to John Caldera on the way home and just kind of get those two different viewpoints.
Yes.
And by the time my 3 years was over at Metro, my philosophy had pretty much flipped as well. So it's my path to where I am now was a crazy one.
Right. Where do you think that came from as far as how did you know that you should be listening to both sides of the story?
The one thing that I grew up with, even though my parents were very liberal, they were very much about education, and they were very much about learning both sides of the view.
Right.
And I remember when I was in high school, when I would have one job or another, whatever, and I'd come home and I'd be frustrated and I'd want to quit or whatever. My dad would always say to me, there's always two sides to the story. You need to take a minute, sit down, breathe deep, figure out exactly if that's what you want to do, sleep on it, get some additional information, and then make the decision. Because if you make the decision in the heat of the moment, you're not going to be happy. And so my mom and dad always stressed that I still needed to see both sides of the equation. And that's where I've always loved the learning aspect. And so, I could have listened to National Public Radio all the way to and from school and just been fed more of what I was believing in.
Right.
But I chose not to. And I'll tell you what, it was tough. Mike Rosen always joked he had the Mr. Hold button. And when people would try to talk over him, he would push the cough button so that they couldn't be heard and he could get his point out. And for probably my first year listening to Mike on the radio, I had the Mr. Volume button. And when Mike would get really frustrated with people and start to what I thought demean them, I would have to turn the volume down because I was just mortified. How can you talk to people that way?
Right.
And so it was tough, and it took a gradual get to, but so that was where I was at.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point because I think a lot of people today may be looking to be informed in a way where their biases are confirmed.
I agree. And it kind of is why I got to the point that I got to in my career and how I ended up at Complete, Colorado, was because even though I do agree with that, I was having this conversation actually with a former colleague of mine the other day, who was one of my editors, who we don't agree eye to eye on hardly anything. She's very liberal and very conservative, but we are still very close friends, and we still respect each other's opinions.
Yeah.
And what we were talking about was there was a report put out by Poynter, who is the gold star in journalism. The Poynter Institute is like a journalism school for journalists.
Okay.
And it was one of those, it was a report, or it was a story or an op-ed that said maybe news organizations ought to stop covering the protests around opening up government. And I got frustrated, and I said, I cannot believe that an organization that is supposed to be about both sides of the issue and is supposed to be all about being unbiased and fair is now condoning the idea that you don't cover this side, because in the op-ed, all it was doing was what they called reinforcing a false narrative.
Right.
And my point was, as a as a conservative, and I actually probably am more libertarian than conservative,
Yeah.
but as a right of center person, I honestly believe that it wouldn't hurt America if every journalist was honest about their political viewpoint. Because to me, when you read something, if you read it with the filter that you're reading it through, if you know that Sherrie Peif is a conservative and I'm writing from a very conservative viewpoint, that's the filter that tells you how to take that story. But if Sherrie Peif is writing a story, and you know I'm very conservative, and I'm writing a story that is very favorable of a liberal standpoint or a liberal politician, again, you know where to take that. Right. Because I'm praising a liberal side coming from a conservative viewpoint. So I don't know that it would hurt America to know where everybody's coming from. It's when you have members of the mainstream who want to pretend that they are unbiased, and you can hear the bias in how they word their questions, how they write their stories, how they act on Twitter. That's where the American public starts to get confused.
Right. And I think that's a great way of looking at it, because that almost carries more weight. You know, when you come forward and you're going to validate or, you know, say positive things about the other side, knowing that you're coming from the more conservative area, then we need to really pay attention to what you're saying there.
Right. And it works the other way too. You know, I've written some very hard stories in opposition of members of my own party and things that they have done. And so it's the same thing. When I hold another conservative's feet to the fire, or I watchdog a conservative politician, it tends to have more weight as well, because people know that I'm not just—
it's not easy to do that.
It's not easy to do that.
Yeah.
And but I've had many folks—
it's necessary.
Right. And I've had many of those very same folks come to me at a later point and say, you know, I may not always agree with what you write, but at least I know where you're coming at it from, and I know you're coming at it fairly. And that's kind of the point that I try to put off.
Right. So when you pick a story that you're going to kind of dig into, what's the process of that? How does a reporter come across their stories, just so the public can start to understand how this whole thing goes down? Is it put out to you, hey, go find a story on this topic? Or is it something that you come across? How does that progress?
It really kind of depends. And it also depends on where you're at in your career.
Okay.
You know, early on in your career, most of the time your stories are going to come from your assignment editor, and your editor is going to say, hey, you need to go cover this. And that's what you do.
Okay.
The further you get into your career, the more contacts that you develop, the more tips you start to receive from the public. And so in my situation, being a freelancer, even though I have a full-time contract with Complete Colorado and the Independence Institute, I still am a freelance reporter. I work for several other publications as well. I have people who will just send me an email or an instant message and say, hey, did you see this? Hey, have you heard about this? Hey, could you look into this for me? Here's a really good example. And one of my son's old baseball coaches tagged me in something on Facebook and said, I'm really curious why the jets are flying over Windsor so much lately. Sherrie Peif, could you look into this for me? I don't understand why we have so much military action. And it was just a tag me on Facebook kind of thing. I ended up calling F.E. Warren Air Force Base up in Cheyenne, who said, nope, that's not us. But we know it's probably out of the 140th. Called the 140th at Buckley. Buckley called back. By the end of 48 hours later, I had a story talking about what the military is doing in the height of the COVID and why they're, you know, flying so much around northern Colorado these days.
Right.
And so that story just came from a friend who said, hey, hey, Sherrie, can you look into this?
Right.
Other stories are people who are like frustrated with something, you know, can you help me get justice for this? And then other times it really is a lot about localizing national stories or localizing. The reason you see so much of this, oh, this person survived with COVID-19, this person survived, all of these human interest stories is because media is trying to find a local spin on the national catastrophe or the worldwide catastrophe. Okay. So they're going out and looking for those stories.
Right.
They're not creating them, but they're definitely looking for them. I do that a lot. I'll post on Facebook and say, hey, does anybody know anybody who's done this or can do this? Usually looking for a source for a story idea.
And so how do you vet your information? So like that one you were just talking about, well, it's the military, you're making calls to the military, and obviously, you're going to get reliable information when you're calling the department.
Right.
But when you're doing a more loose story, how do you vet information? And it's not just, he said, she said kind of stuff.
It can work any number of ways. The story that I'm thinking of off the top of my head that I didn't do, but was all over media for a very long time, were the two nurses that were blocking traffic at the rally a couple weeks ago.
Yes.
Okay. So that was a story where right after that happened, I had a ton of people email me and go, are you looking into this? Are you looking into this? And I'm like, yeah, actually I am, because they refused to give their names. They refused to give the hospital that they were working at. There was no real information initially in the beginning other than they said they were healthcare workers. And that's what the Westward reporter went with, was in his tweet, was healthcare workers. And that's what the photographer went with, was healthcare workers. Mm. So there was a lot of information flying around out there from people saying, well, I think it's this person, I think it's that person. I went so far as I had pictures of the guy. I had pictures from Twitter, I had pictures from Facebook, I had pictures from Instagram, all these different photos of who somebody thought it was, trying to compare him to the photos in the pictures that were taken, calling friends and everything. I spent probably 72 hours on it. And because I could not say without any doubt in my mind that that truly was that person, I wasn't going to do a story on it. I mean, there has to be, the thing that I like about what I do now for Complete Colorado is if I need to take 3-4 weeks to write a story, Complete Colorado is not about breaking the news. We're not about making sure that we're first to the story. We're about making sure that the story you get is accurate. Do we make mistakes? Absolutely. We still make mistakes because everybody makes mistakes.
Yeah.
But for the most part, I have the luxury of being able to spend 3 or 4 days vetting those kinds of situations, where at a normal mainstream daily newspaper, sometimes if you're assigned something at 11 o'clock in the morning or even 2 o'clock in the afternoon and you have a 5 o'clock deadline, you have 3 hours and you're gonna and that's why so many mistakes are introduced into daily newspapers, and one of the reasons why I got out.
Right. Yeah, because I read something about, a newspaper can get 4 million views on their website about a story. And even though it's untrue, they still make money off those 4 million views. So
absolutely.
Then they can go back and retract. Okay. But the retraction only gets 30,000 views, but they don't have to give the money back for the 4 million first views.
And that's because that's how they advertise. Advertisers want to see what their unique views are and what their unique hits are and how many shares they had. And so absolutely, that's why the phrase clickbait came to pass, is because the more sensationalized the headline, the more people you're going to get to click on it. Whether or not they ever read the story, the advertiser has no idea. All they know is that, X media outlet said, hey, 400,000 people clicked on this.
Right. But this is why I think it's so important that we need to educate the public, and myself included. We can't just take any story that we read nowadays as truth, because I mean, there's people such as yourself that have degrees in journalism that are bound by ethics, and they have standards, and you've built a reputation for yourself. So you're going to be pretty careful about what you put out there, because you don't want to ruin any of that. Your body of work is massive now, and you don't want to taint any of that. But we also have people that are coming fresh on the scene and don't really have a lot to lose, or are even reporting under a alias.
Which is probably the biggest point that I would make when people say, how do you vet the story that you're reading? Yeah. And it's funny because over the course, I have my naysayers. I have the people that don't like me out there. And so it's funny, over the course of the last few years, I've heard that I've authored this, or I've authored that, and I laugh every time I hear that, because anybody who knows me, anybody who has followed my body of work, knows that I'm not afraid to put my name on something. If I'm going to say something, it's going to come from me. And if you don't like it, you don't like it. So I find it the very first thing that you can do when you see a story, if there is no author's name on it, if the website that it's coming from doesn't tell you who's operating the website, if there is no, in the very beginning, if you don't know who wrote the story, to where you can go to Google and run that person's name through Google and see what their background is, that's the first thing. That, don't even read the story. I have people send me links to stories all the time that are done on these anonymous websites all across Colorado. Some of them are conservative, some of them are liberal, some of them are libertarian. There's a ton of them in Colorado that are anonymous websites. Nobody has any idea who's running them, and none of the stuff is authored. And the minute I see that they have sent me a link to a story from X organization, I don't even read it. I don't even read it, because I know that that organization, I have no idea whose money is behind it. I have no idea who's actually operating it, what their agenda is, or who the person is that is unwilling to put their name on it. If somebody is not willing to put their name on it, don't even read it. Whether it's right or not is irrelevant. I don't even read it. And that's the first thing you look at, is somebody who's willing to put their face on what they're saying. And so that's the first place that you start at. The second place that you start at is, how many times has it been repeated? Even if it's been repeated.
Yeah, that's a good point.
By other non-traditional, because a lot of times people will say, well, that's all that the traditional media will put in there. And that might be true as well. But if something is generally true, if something is really super obnoxious, but yet it's still true, it's going to be published somewhere else, somewhere. Even if it's 2 or 3 things. It might be something that, you're right, mainstream doesn't want to put out there, but somebody else will have, and not just that it was linked to another place, but that somebody independently wrote something similar somewhere else. So has it been published more than once or twice or 3 times by other independent bloggers or reporters or whatever? That's the second thing you can find. And then the third thing is, whomever they're quoting in the story, if they're not attributing to anybody, if they're telling you a source close to the story, or somebody inside the White House, or somebody inside, if they can't deliver you one solid source, again, of somebody willing to put their name on it, I don't buy it. And either that, or you need to do some additional research before you take it for fact. You don't just take it for fact. So you need to be able to vet and look online. You can Google just about anybody. There's hardly nobody in America that isn't found on a website somewhere. So you need to be able to find and vet the people that are inside the story as well. And that's not to say that anonymous sources aren't used, because I have used anonymous sources as well. But
is it then that you would explain why you're not divulging their name?
And I've only done it, I'm telling you, I can count on one hand the number of times in my life where I have used an anonymous source in 30 years of writing.
Wow.
Yeah, because I won't do it very often. But yes, there are times. One of the stories I did was early on at the Tribune, when medical marijuana was first legalized in Colorado. I did a story on one of the first dispensaries that was opening up in Windsor. And the guy that owned the dispensary happened to be a paramedic. And he was not quite ready for the paramedic community
to know
what he was doing. So he had asked if there was any way he could do this. Well, yeah, because I'm physically walking into a store. I know that the store is open. I know that it is selling medical marijuana. Who owns the store didn't change the outcome of the story. So the rule of thumb has always been, you use an anonymous source only if it doesn't change the outcome of the story, and if not using that person would give you no story. So so you have to be, but you do have to explain, why you're not identifying this person, and it better be a good reason why you're not identifying the person.
Is another good way to be able to kind of check, like if you happen to lean more conservatively and you have your favorite reporters that you kind of check in with, that like and trust, and they've never steered you wrong, is another good way to kind of, if it's a newer story or whatever, to vet it, is to like just go look on the other side.
Oh, absolutely.
And just read, this could be a good way for us to kind of get in the habit of not, looking for confirmation of our own ideas all the time.
Right. Oh, absolutely. And I still do that. I said I did that back when I was going to school.
Yeah.
I still do that. I still read very far left liberal blog sites just to bring myself into check and make sure that I'm not. And I also read very far right blog sites because like I said, I'm somewhere in that middle
center.
group.
Yeah.
I'm not one side or the other.
Right.
So it's always beneficial to look to the other side and see what is being reported on the other side. Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's so funny that you say that, because there's like a quiz out there that you can take that will tell you what side of the aisle you fall on, so to speak. And I think it's I can't remember the exact statistics, but it's very high. Most people fall in the center.
They do. They actually really do. It's a fraction on both ends of the spectrum. Most everybody is in the center. Nobody can for 100%, I shouldn't say nobody. Most people cannot for 100% say they are going to vote this particular philosophy 100% of the time.
Right.
And, and that's accurate. And I myself have endorsed Democrats for office. I have endorsed policies. And so that's, and I've never been afraid to admit that. And I've taken heat for that, but I don't.
But that's human. So, but I mean, that's human.
Right. There's an exception to every rule. And there's also, I like to call it logic. You have to be logical in some sense. Yeah. You also have to compromise in some sense.
Right.
You're not always going to get 100% of everything that you want. And so that's kind of full circle where we started this thing.
Yeah.
I don't mind wearing a mask when I go into public.
Right.
I don't mind standing 6 feet away from somebody.
Right.
I don't mind giving up restaurants for a while, bars for a while, concerts for a while.
Right.
I understand that aspect of it.
Right.
But I also think that there's a happy medium that we could come to that would allow these people to get back to work and never had been closed. I mean, if you look at barbers and hairdressers, those are one-on-one services.
Yeah.
Those could have remained open through this whole situation.
Right. With precautions
in place. Precautions and everything else. Exactly. I mean, the health department is there already. There's already restrictions on barbers and hairdressers. Mm-hmm. They already have certain health restrictions that they have to follow in order to be in business. Adding a few more restrictions isn't going to hurt the situation, but it'll allow you to stay open and allow you to continue to feed your family.
Right. Right. It's interesting because, there's some people that are just really ready to get back to work, obviously, like we talked about before. And there's some people that are just, really, frightened of it. And then we're getting this, banter back and forth and this like accusatory type reaction. And I think about, like, I like to study fear I think it's a fascinating topic because it controls so many things.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
And fear is energy. When we have fear, it's energy. It manifests as anxiety. We got to move it. And so what I see happening is people are fearful. They don't really know where to put that energy. And so they're lashing out on, this person doesn't agree with me.
Absolutely.
Right? So they're channeling their fear about the situation onto any target that they can find. Just the other night, my husband and we live out in the country. And, dirt roads and all. We're on a little farm and we're walking our dogs and there's a black giant SUV, which I found kind of funny, pulling beside us, and their kid rolls down the window and sticks her head out the window and says, "Where are your masks?"
Oh, yeah. You're outside. It's you and your husband. You're not having contact with anybody
nobody
else.
Around.
Right.
But this is the energy I'm talking about, the fear energy that everybody's holding that needs to get out. They want to place it on other people. And I think we really have to be disciplined about not doing that right now. If you're not comfortable with what other people are doing, you're going to have to find a way to channel that energy somewhere else because it's not helping to create more of this anxiety.
And we've seen it several times in history. If you think back, 9/11 my very first day as an intern at Channel 2 in Denver was on 9/11.
Oh, God.
I know, right? Exactly. I go rolling into the station at 4 a.m. in the morning, and by 9 a.m.,
your life is
I'm
different.
with Greg Nieto out at Stapleton International Airport, or DIA, I guess it would have been, because of 9/11. I mean, what a day to start as an intern, right?
Yeah, going in with a bang.
Right. And I remember the fear that people had after 9/11, because everybody thought that anybody who wore a turban or who was from the Middle East was going to be a terrorist.
Right.
And I remember the hatred and the vitriol that came from 9/11, and we had to get through that fear, you know?
Yes.
And then after the shooting in the open concert in Las Vegas,
Yeah.
when I would go to Bronco games or Rockies games after that, everybody not everybody, but people in the surrounding area where I was at were constantly looking to the skies, and they were scared to death of what was going to come at that point. Yeah. And there was ugly and a lot of stuff, and that's where we're at now. People are afraid of dying. Yeah. That is a real fear that people have. I have it myself. I had it for a very long time. I actually sought help to get me through. I spent multiple time with my preacher trying to get me through my fear of dying.
Right.
And it wasn't until I spent a lot of time with my preacher working through that I got over that. And people, it's a natural fear of dying, but it's not a fear that we have taken on during flu season. And that's a real promise that you may die of flu. Right. It's not a fear that we take on, that smokers take on a lot, or that alcoholics take on a lot. There's a lot of reasons out there that put us in, and we can walk out our front door and cross the street and get hit by a car, but yet we continue to cross the street. And you're right. People need to take a deep breath and think through these ideas that there's people out there. I mean, I've already been told that they really hope that I come down with COVID-19 and that I don't expect any help.
That's disgusting. That's disgusting.
I mean,
it's just disgusting because one thing I think we need to think about too is that you don't ever eliminate fear, but you become better at managing it.
Oh, absolutely.
And our fear of death or whatever actually can unite us if we don't channel our fear into blame.
Right. And
right? Just accept that you're experiencing fear. Talk about how you don't know how to manage it. How are you managing it? How are you managing it? Like,
tell me why you're not afraid. Tell me why you think that this policy would be better than this policy.
Yeah.
Not I'm so disappointed in you, and I really hope you don't expect to get any kind of medical care should you come down with this. Or these releases that they're now putting out there, asking people who want to open the economy back up to sign away their rights to health care. Right. It needs to be discussed. It needs to be thoughtful, and people need to take a big, deep breath before the vitriol with this particular instance. I have never seen anything like it.
Right. I think it's a helpful thing is to kind of audit your belief system too. Are you looking to confirm something bad? And if you are, why are you looking to confirm that?
Right.
Why are you wanting more information to confirm that you may die? Right. Whereas, there could be emotion there controlling that. You might have an up spike in emotion that's causing you to look for that information to heighten your fear. Right. And so you have to look at that and figure out, why am I not wanting to bring this fear down? Right.
And you can validate, if you really truly believe in one side or the other, and the side that you believe in is a side that has drawn you to the fear and the hate. There's nothing wrong with going out and looking for articles that say something different than what you believe in. Right. Vetting who wrote it, making sure that the person who wrote it doesn't have an underlying agenda going on. And read it and write down the pros and the cons of what you're seeing. Try to really walk through and see. And I've had this thing from the very beginning of this. I was really angry at the start because it seemed like to me that the virus itself was overblown from the very beginning. It took me about a week to realize that the virus was not overblown, that it was a problem,
Yeah.
but it was my reaction. It was how I chose to react.
Right.
I was mad because CHSA was shutting down sports, and I was mad because Major League Baseball was shutting down a season. And I thought they were knee-jerk reactions to something that we didn't know anything about.
Right.
And we didn't really know anything about it at that point.
Right.
Within a week, we knew it was probably the right calls to make, and I'm okay with it. But then I still came to this conclusion, and I've said it on my Facebook page so many times. The CDC, the local health department, the state health department, nobody else. Every doctor out there has their own view and their own opinion and their own thought process. And I've got some private doctors that I like their process as well because it matches up with mine. Right. And I share them. But when it comes to actual hardcore numbers, I have said from the beginning, trust nobody but the CDC. The CDC is the group that is in charge of taking the numbers and putting them out there.
Right. Well, we didn't even have numbers because we weren't out.
Well, and that's the other half of that is the other thing. And I'm still saying it to this day. Stop doing the math. The math is what causes 90% of the fear out there, because people go, oh, there's 12,000 cases and 1,200 deaths. That means there's a 10%
death rate.
Stop doing the math. You will never know what the death rate is until we know how many people actually have it. And the cases, until everybody in the country, everybody in the world can be tested, we're not going to know that. And so that is the biggest, stop doing the math. Well, I don't know that we will.
No.
Maybe in 5 years when the testing is finally at a point where but not anytime soon.
Right. It's so messy.
Yeah,
we live in messy. It's not a black and white situation.
No, we live in a state of 4.5 million people, and they've tested 50,000.
What does that
think about those numbers? We live in a state of 4.5 million people, and they've tested 50,000.
Right.
And even of those 50,000, there's only how many cases?
Right.
So just stop doing the math.
Right. Right. How are you getting your information? Like you just mentioned CDC, but locally, how are you getting information locally? And if you are, who's it from? And what are they saying?
I'm getting it from the Weld County Health Department and the state and the Colorado State Health Department. Everything all the numbers that I put up come from the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment and from the Weld County Department of Public Health and Environment. And whether you want to believe that they're inflating the death numbers because there's this idea out there that, everything that you die from now has a comorbidity of coronavirus on it. Whether you want to believe that or not, that's up to you. Yeah. The point is, those are the numbers. Those are the numbers that they're going to go with. And so those are the numbers that I have to go with because those are official.
Right.
So I get my stuff. And Weld County's health department has picked up over the last couple of weeks after major pushback, major outcry for more transparency. Because in the beginning, Weld County wasn't giving out a lot of transparency.
Right.
And a lot of push onto the commissioners has helped that. But that's where I get my stuff, is from the CDC, from the state health department, and from all of the county health departments across the state, because those are the official numbers.
And whether they're right or not is arguable, but we're never going to know anyway. And this is
I remember when the whole comorbidity thing, my dad died in 1986, and his death certificate says he died of respiratory distress, or it says he died of cardiac arrest, but then there is an additional caveat on there of respiratory distress, an additional caveat on there of the flu. Right. So back in 1986, he had a comorbidity of the flu. He is a flu death.
Right.
That's exactly what some of this is being, and to me, that's not a huge thing. Now, if you die in a car accident and they stick coronavirus on it, you might want to question that.
Right.
But if you have somebody who goes into the hospital who has asthma, who has respiratory problems,
or autoimmune
systems, or diabetes, they are high risk, and it's very possible they may not have died had they not come down with coronavirus.
Right.
Right. So that comorbidity isn't really that big of a deal.
Right. And there's the two doctors video. I think, it's pretty popular right now. It's circulating, the two LA doctors. I think you posted an additional piece of information about it actually today. they mentioned, and I thought it was a very valid point. Like, nobody dies from one thing.
No, they don't.
Right? It's not one thing. So like when the AIDS epidemic was going on, we kept seeing people dying, and it was always listed as pneumonia. Well,
Right.
because they're immune compromised.
Right.
And at pneumonia.
Right.
Right. So
exactly.
That, which is which. It's not, if they didn't have AIDS, then they probably wouldn't have gotten pneumonia, but ultimately pneumonia was the cause of death.
Right.
So there's multiple things to consider here. It's not so cut and dry.
It's not. And that's the other part of determining what is truth and what is not truth.
Right.
Is understanding that nothing is black and white. Very rarely.
Very rarely.
There's always two sides to a story. And that's, and that's the whole thing, is not everything can be black and white. Yeah. There's a lot of gray area when you're dealing with human emotion. Yes. There is a ton of gray area.
And I think we need to be a little bit more forgiving about it too. Like, are you perfect? I'm not.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
So, just because you find out that somebody that you really, respected and loved and thought they were just you're the one that put them up on a pedestal. Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. You did that for yourself, hypothetically, right? You put this person up on a pedestal, and then when they don't reach that, they come a little short, they make a mistake or whatever. Oh, then all of a sudden there's this swarm to ruin this person's existence. Mm-hmm. But we're all fallible,
Right. And like I said in the beginning, there's those three groups of people. And there's this idea out there that because somebody may want to protect the economy, they have no compassion for humanity. Exactly. That they're inhumane and they just don't care. And that couldn't be further from the truth, because most of the people who are wanting to protect the economy understand what a depression does to society. Right. Not monetarily, but mentally, what it does to a society. And I for one don't want to live through that.
Right. Yeah, the struggle's real, and it gets pretty ugly pretty fast.
It does. It really does.
Yeah. How do you feel about suppression of information? Like, so I'm kind of in the natural health world. I just passionate about natural health and being proactive with your health and, fixing a problem before it even starts. That's kind of my philosophy. And I get pretty annoyed with some of the things that have been going around, because there's hard science-based factual things that are being taken down because they don't fit the narrative. Right?
Yeah. I get really frustrated. So there's two sides to me on that as well. I get really frustrated that certain social media outlets have decided to become the king of truth, the overall arching decider of what is truth and what is not truth. Yes. I guess when Mark Zuckerberg started Facebook, he probably should have had a real deep internal conversation with himself that not everybody is always going to agree. Right. And you either start a social media site where you allow people from all different philosophical viewpoints to have those conversations, or you don't. Right. The idea that the owners of Facebook and Twitter and all these other social sites need to be the keepers of the truth is very frustrating for me.
Scary.
It is scary because
what qualifies them?
It's the keeper. Exactly, and it's the keeper of their truth. It's because now their own personal biases are playing into it and determining whether or not.
Yep.
Now, the other side to that is there is this thing on Facebook that people are growing more and more frustrated with, where you put something up and Facebook covers it and says this is partially true.
This is exactly what I'm talking about.
And I'm kind of okay with that. Because quite honestly, when you ask what is a good way to vet a story, Facebook isn't keeping you from reading that. Because you can click on it and still read it. What Facebook is saying to you is, there might be
your antenna up.
Exactly. So I'm kind of okay with the put your antenna up. Yeah. We're telling you before you look at this that there might be something wrong with it. click on it and still read it and make your own decision. But we're just telling you there might be something wrong. What I'm not okay with is when stuff is removed and not allowed to even be seen.
Bingo. And that's what I thought you were talking about. Cause you know how they blur it out and they say this content, it was found as false. Well, you know, I talk to a lot of nutritionists, functional medicine practitioners. We're talking highly educated people, you know, that study microbiology and have for years and years and dedicated their lives to learning about this. And, you know, there's hard science behind vitamin C boosting your immune system. Now, one of the nutritionists I follow, that her video got taken down for that information. That's insane.
That is insane. And that's where they cross the line, because I can see where they're probably thinking, oh, people are going to think that simply if they take vitamin C, that they're going to be able to
kill the. She never even talked about it.
Right. But look at what happened when the president made this remark about Clorox.
Oh, unbelievable! Yeah.
Right. Because any adult with a half a brain is really going to take what he said. You know, that's half the problem we have right now, is we have a world where our president apparently has to be perfect, and he's not allowed to just think, you know, talk out loud what he's thinking.
Like that would be a conversation you would have in your car with your friends. Like, oh, I wonder if this would work or that would work. And anybody that was involved in that conversation would like, oh, okay.
And we have all thought out loud. And how many times has anyone said, well, maybe you ought to think about that. Maybe we ought to do this. Seriously. And we've turned it into this. People have turned it into this. The president is recommending you drink Clorox. No, I'm pretty sure that's not what he recommended. So Facebook is now deleting all of these defenses of that, because they think that we are trying to encourage people. I haven't put any of them up myself, and I say we as a general term, but they think that people are trying to, you know, encourage other people to drink Clorox. No, not any more than anybody tried to encourage anybody to eat Tide Pods.
Right.
And I think once you hit 6 years old, you can probably figure out that Tide Pods and Clorox are not something that you ingest.
Yes. And that's a good point that you bring up, because like how far are you willing to go to support how you feel about something? Right. I mean, regardless of how you feel, is what you're putting your feelings out there about something, you know, is that productive? Right. And how far, and it's just, again, self-audit, right? Because we can't blanket everybody, but if we're all kind of, you know, auditing ourselves, then we have a better chance of pushing through this period.
The one thing that I think would help on social media would be, rather than Facebook trying to fact check everything, is maybe just take down their share button. Because people have a tendency to just share, you know,
without reading.
They see, that's the other thing about how do you tell a good story from a bad story. I can tell you how many times I'll post a story and somebody will come in and comment on my story, and it's a comment that doesn't even have anything to do with my story. I shouldn't say it doesn't have anything to do with my story. It takes something that I have said in my story out of context, but I can tell by the comment that they've written that they didn't even read the story.
Right.
But basically what they did was read the headline. And we write headlines that hope people click on them. That's why you write a headline, because you need to interest the people. Right. You know, it's not necessarily clickbait, but if that's what you want to call it, that's what you want to call it.
Right.
You need to get somebody to click on it. But I can't tell you how many times I see things where people have commented on stuff and they haven't obviously even read it.
Right.
So people share in the same fashion. You know, the big thing is, don't share something until you've read the whole thing and you have vetted it. Don't just automatically share it because Billy Joe Jim Bob normally has the same philosophy as you.
So it must be okay.
It must be okay.
Yeah.
Because
share responsibly.
Right, exactly. And I think Facebook could go way far out if they would get rid of the share button. Because you have friends, I have friends, we all have friends whose privacy is locked down. So that if they do have something that we would really like to share and the share button is gone, we can't share it, we have to either screenshot it, click on it, go get the link. It's much more difficult to share.
You got to really want to.
You have to really want to share it.
Yeah.
And in a lot of cases, there's times where I go, yeah, I don't have time. I'm not going to worry about it. It's not that big of a deal.
Right.
If Facebook would get rid of the share button,
it's an interesting concept.
I think we might have less of the fake news out there that we've got.
Yeah. So talking about the fake news, how does that, we hear about how it's affecting our society because, people can be taken from 0 to 100 in emotion like that with fake news. But how does it affect you as a journalist? And how does it affect your colleagues and whatnot?
It is probably the most overused term that has ever come to play.
Sick of it.
And I hate it. I really hate it. Fake news is exactly what it says it is. It's fake. If I were to post a story tomorrow that said Donald Trump drank Clorox in an effort to test his theory, that is fake news. Fake is what it is. It's fake. It's false. It didn't happen. It didn't occur.
Right.
It's not accurate. Fake news has become a term that people use for don't agree with your philosophy. Don't agree with what you wrote. Don't agree with the point of view. That is why I hate the term so much, because I have been labeled fake media. I can't tell you how many times. You know what I mean? I actually laughed because I was on Twitter one time and there was somebody calling Kyle Clark, fake journalist, fake news, whatever, blah, 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 blah. And I commented back, God, I'm glad to see I'm not the only one. I'm glad to see I'm not the only person getting up with this.
Right.
Because
it's a catch-all term.
It is a catch-all term, and it's become a crutch. It's become a crutch for people to use when they just don't agree with something. Not agreeing with a point of view, maybe a story that doesn't give both sides. Even if it doesn't give both sides, it still doesn't mean it's fake.
Right.
What it means is it's biased. Use biased news over fake news. It doesn't mean it's fake. I hate the term, and people need to understand fake news is exactly that. The sky is yellow.
Yeah.
That is fake news.
Yeah, where it's actually not a fact. It is not a fact.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and I find that people are using that kind of political spectrum as escape zone as well. Like, a video that I had shared about those two LA doctors that were they just deciphered their data in front of a camera. I mean, that's essentially what they did in that video. And someone commented, "Oh, these are Trumpers." I don't know how you got that from that video.
Right.
And just because someone disagree or you don't agree with their point of view on a different topic, we now just put them into the other camp.
Well, and you also, what amazes me, and it happens on both sides, it doesn't happen just on one side.
Yeah.
Is the idea that I'm right, you're wrong. There's no discussion. I don't want to hear what you have to say because you're just wrong. I'm right. I can't tell you why I'm right. I don't need to tell you why I'm right. I just know I'm right, and I'm right because that's what X person said. You're wrong. Right. That is what drives me. That has cost me friendships. I have managed to keep friendships that we are on a complete polar opposites politically. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. We are so politically opposite. It's scary.
I know. That's what I love about following you.
And we have stayed friends forever. Coronavirus literally has cost me friendships because there are people out there that just absolutely want to blame me because their spouse got sick. They want to blame me because I'm inhumane and I don't care who dies. Blaming me for those things, probably not the smartest thing to do because I'm not the one to blame, and I'm not going to surround myself with people who are irrational. And this COVID-19 has caused irrational behaviors on both sides of the spectrum.
Right. Well, just like we talked about previously with that, fear is energy, and they're looking for a place to to put that fear. And it goes from, feeling anxiety to needing a target to blame,
Right. Yep.
to blame. And
Absolutely.
unfortunately, you end up being that target.
Yeah.
That's unfortunate.
I've been in this business long enough to know that my skin has grown so thick.
Yeah. What
I've,
a gift.
yeah, it's
That's a
sad and it
gift.
makes me sad at
Yeah,
times.
I bet.
But at the same time, I have never been one to wallow in self-pity. And
Yeah.
I'm not one to concern myself with who does and who doesn't want to be my friend.
Yeah.
Um, I love what I do for a living, and I would never, it's funny, I've been asked to run for political office a couple times, and I just
Yeah.
laugh because I would not make a good politician.
Right.
I'm better on the other side of it.
Right. And you love what you do.
And that's just it. I love what I do.
Yeah.
And I love being the watchdog and trying to get a decorum of truth out there that people know that when I put my name on something, I have vetted what my name is on. You may not agree with it.
Right.
You may not like it, but
Mm-hmm.
I didn't just throw it together and stick it out there and, here you go.
Right. Right. How do you keep that objectivity? Is it just coming from, your roots as, brought up by your mom and dad that just instilled that in you? Are you constantly working to keep your objectivity?
I'm constantly working to keep my objectivity.
It's a journey,
And
right?
anybody, and I've said this before, any journalist that says at any point, I have no bias is wrong. People by nature have a bias. You have a bias as to whether or not the teacher at X school is a good teacher.
Right.
Everybody is inherent with a bias. And every journalist out there, if they don't say that they are constantly having to work to keep their objectivity, they're lying. Because in order to tell two sides, you have to put aside your side. You're gonna have a side. Everybody has a side.
Right.
So you have to put aside your side in order to tell both sides.
Right. It's like a muscle too. Like you have to practice it. You're not going to just be able to get, doing that on the fly all the time. You have to actually, and I think that's one thing too, is that, we have to learn that thinking like requires self-discipline sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
You can't just like go with whatever pops in your head. And, like you were saying that your dad said, just get more information, sleep on it, wait, process, but the very act of doing all that, you have to practice it.
Yeah, no, you do. You absolutely do. It doesn't come easy. It's no different than I have a huge fear of heights. I've always had a huge fear of heights.
Mm-hmm.
And for the longest time when I would travel, I would have to get a sedative of some sort from my doctor in order for me to even walk on a plane because I was so paranoid. And it took me 10 years before I was able to work myself through the point where I can now get on a plane by myself without anything else and not be panic stricken the whole time I'm in the air.
Right.
And it was something that I had to work at. And that is
work through. Yeah.
And work through.
Yeah.
And I'm still not completely through it because even though I've gotten over my fear of flying, that doesn't mean that when I'm on the 13th floor looking out of a window in a hotel room, I'm okay. I'm not.
Right.
I'm still, and I'm working through that every time something happens and it puts me in that situation. It's the same thing with everything. It's something that you constantly have to be working at, and that fear is the same thing, and that objectivity is the same thing. You have to constantly be working at it.
Yeah. What kind of standards and ethics, like as you go through journalism school, because we're not all journalists out here in the public, we don't know. So what ethics and standards are there as a baseline that, you're upheld to?
You don't create a story, and that's different from you finding a story or looking for a story. When an editor says to you, you need to go find somebody who's affected by COVID-19 and their business has been shut down, that's not creating a story because that story is out there. Somebody's been affected
go find
by
this story.
blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
However, you don't go out and find people to purposely do something so that you have a story. There's
so we see a bit of that with leading questions. I've seen in the media,
and that's just it. Yeah, you don't lead your source to the answer. You know, you give direct questions and you take direct answers.
Right.
And one of the things that I was always taught was you start with yes or no questions, and then once they've given you your yes or no, then you give the why, because it's easier to get a direct answer when it's a yes or no question. And then once they've given that, then the next question is just why. You're not leading them into anything. You're asking them a direct point and then getting the answer as to what they're, you know, getting the reasoning as to what their answer was. So you don't create stories. You don't go out and find things that, you know, you want to tell your narrative.
Mm-hmm.
In the
What
same,
about like dramatizing stories though? You know, like I heard a term like presentation news.
I've not heard that one before.
I just heard that the other day. It was like,
Yeah.
we're presenting news, and it was in regards to, and I have not vetted this story, so I'm not trying to spread fake news, but I heard that. I heard it a couple places that Chris Como, I think his name is,
Mhm.
had COVID-19, and later to be discovered that he actually didn't have it, and that they had, you know, constructed this scenario where he comes out of his basement, out of quarantine, to, oh, I've been down there for so long, and this was called presentation news.
No, it's called creating a story. And
Yeah.
it's exactly what I
Exactly.
just said you don't do. No, you don't do that. That's not, find somebody who has COVID-19 and tell their story. You
Yeah.
know, that is exactly if that's what presentation news is, it's creating the story. And you don't do that. There's
Yeah.
no gotcha. You don't do gotcha stories. You
Yeah.
don't set somebody up so that you have a story. You don't try to fake something out so that you have a story. You
Right.
report on what's happening, you know?
Right. And it rarely ends up that a story that's actually true and can be vetted and all that ties up like a plot of a movie.
Right, exactly. No, you're exactly right. And you know, the other side of that also is when you ask, you know, you've in order the ethics, you vet your sources. You make sure
Yeah.
that the people you're talking to truly are the experts, or truly are the people that are impacted, or truly are the people that are part of this story. Um, you know, you make sure that your story is fair and balanced and accurate. You
Mm-hmm.
don't extend the numbers. You don't
Right.
spin the numbers. You don't, you know,
Right.
you just, and that's why on one of my Facebook pages every single day for the last month and a half, I have been putting just the numbers. I don't try to extrapolate them.
Right.
I don't try to tell people what they mean. I just, here's the numbers.
Right.
So those kinds of things, you know,
Yeah.
you try to avoid certain language, certain words, you know,
Yes.
ly words. We were always taught to avoid using words that end in ly, because almost always it's an opinion, you know.
Right.
Tammy happily invited Sherrie onto this show. Well, how do I know? I mean, that right there puts a opinion that you
Right.
were happy when you did it. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Right.
So we were always taught to avoid ly words.
Right.
Those,
That's a good point too, maybe to mention, is like opinion piece versus hard news.
mhm. It should be
Right.
clearly labeled opinion piece.
Yes. And they're
And that's where
not.
the lines have blurred. I don't know if you saw, I posted the other day that I really don't know what purpose Twitter has anymore, because all Twitter has become is a venue for politicians and journalists to take jabs at each other. And if you go to Twitter, that's exactly what it is. It's journalists patting themselves on the back, or taking jabs at politicians, or politicians patting themselves on the back or taking jabs at journalists.
Right.
And it's Twitter. Here's another way you can vet what side of the fence somebody's on. Go follow them on Twitter. Pick every single one of your favorite journalists out there and go follow them on Twitter, because their Twitter accounts, they are much more apt to have their opinion and show their bias immensely on Twitter.
Right.
I am almost never on Twitter anymore because it just makes me sick. It really makes me sick.
It's really a fighting ground.
It is a fighting ground.
I don't spend much time on there myself, but
it's a good way to vet a writer. Is go follow them on Twitter and see what they're talking about on Twitter.
yeah. Where does this fine line of like Well, it's a hard line for me when it comes to free speech and my personal opinion of it. But where is that line in your arena?
Free speech is a guarantee under the government that the government will not suppress your speech. It's not a guarantee that Sherrie Peif will allow you to speak the way you want on her Facebook page.
Right.
It's that government allows you to speak. And even at that point, and I will fall on the sword for the First Amendment any day of the week. But the thing is, with the First Amendment comes consequences.
Right.
You can't go into a theater and yell fire without a consequence. You have every right to do that. You absolutely do.
Right.
But you know what? When you cause a disruption and you
Put
cause
people
at
danger.
And you put them in danger,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to get, and I said this the other day again on another one of my posts. I have vetted out the people from my Facebook feed. I have over 2,000 friends. I probably know 200 of them personally.
Yeah.
But I have vetted out the people on my Facebook page who seem to think that it's okay to come on and be vulgar or be ugly or bully or be nasty. Some friends of mine, some former colleagues of mine who can't come on my page without just ripping people.
Right.
It's my page.
Yeah.
I get to choose the venue. I have no problem with debate. I have no problem with differences of opinions.
Right.
I have a problem with being ugly and bullying.
Yeah.
So you have a right to free speech. You're right, but you have a consequence. And on my page, it's either I delete your comment and at some point I delete you.
Right.
So that's kind of where my line is. Free speech is free speech, and I'll fall on that sword every day of the week.
Yeah.
But
same.
you have to understand that there are consequences for what you say.
Right. How do you think that affects writing today with new and upcoming, writers and people who want to get their voice out there?
How? What do you mean?
Well, in terms of giving their opinion, and are they filtering it because of terms like hate speech and
Well, I think there's a lot of filter going on because people are fearful of hate speech and the presentation of hate speech, or even the possibility that somebody takes it as hate speech.
Right. Do you think they're coming out turning like with a different mindset, like already built-in filters?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. There is no doubt. There is no doubt in my mind. It has changed so much in the 20, 25 years that I've been in it. Yeah.
I mean, I can be totally honest in certain conversations. I'm 40, almost 45. There's certain words that we used back in the 80s that were completely fine to use and never thought twice about it, that today are offensive. But programming's programming, you grew up saying it or whatever, and then you're just like, oh, I shouldn't say that. And you almost get nervous.
You do. And there's a lot of times that people have to stop and think, and myself included, stop and think about what's about to come out of my mouth.
Yeah.
A really good friend of mine made the remark the other day. We were talking about a political cartoon that a candidate had drawn of her running against somebody else for political office, and it had been accused of being anti-Semitic. And so I showed it to a friend of mine who is Jewish, and she's very Jewish.
Yeah.
And I asked her what she thought of it, and she laughed and she thought it was funny. And I told her what was going on and what was being said, and she goes, seriously, if we can't laugh at ourselves and we can't accept the fact that there is a part of history where we were very much a part of, and if you're a politician and you're a Jewish politician, and we now have to stop criticizing you because you're Jewish, there's a problem. And you're right. There was, everybody is fearful of what to say. And whether she's right or wrong, I don't know. Everybody has their own different emotions and everybody takes things differently. And I think we do have to be careful of what we put out there and how we say it, so that we don't intentionally cause somebody harm.
Right.
But I do think this particular caricature may have caused somebody harm.
Yeah.
But that being said, I think there's also we're too easy sometimes to back off of some things because of our concern of what people are going to read into it.
Right. And that comes into play, I think, with the language we use to describe things. And we were
Mm-hmm.
talking about this the other day, actually, on pirate radio,
Mm-hmm.
talking about, the dramatization of our vocabulary.
Mm-hmm.
Everything's, awesome and, oh, that's terrible. And these words, we use them, just
Mm-hmm.
whatever. But the actual definition of them, if you look it up, like they're pretty extreme words.
Mm-hmm.
And so the whole, all of us are getting such just this emotional, constant drip that we're
Mm-hmm.
on these, using this language.
Mm-hmm.
And you can just be attacked for something and judged when that wasn't your intent. And we no
Right.
longer take in account that, hey, what's the intent behind this?
Right.
Right? What
Right.
was the intent? And
Right.
so if you find yourself getting riled up about something, maybe it's, think about it and go back to the person's intent
Right. No, I agree
instead of
completely.
trying to
Right.
cancel them.
Right. I agree completely. I can't tell you how many times I write things on Facebook and delete them before I ever post them.
Right.
I mean, I always,
Mm.
my mom, that was one of the things my mom always taught me to do, was to put my emotions on paper and then read them before I published them. And there are times where I don't quite, there's times where I hit the publish button a little bit too soon. And I've said some things that I regret, but I own them and they are what they are and there's nothing I
Yeah.
can do about it. But I can tell you there are many, many, many more times that I publish stuff that I pull back later,
Interesting.
or that I pull back before I publish it.
Right. Right. And I think that's, important to remember that, the intention, right? Your intention is to get your point across while still being yourself.
Right. Right.
Right. And this is what
Exactly.
concerns me about new people coming up is, will they, are they getting the opportunity to be themselves
Mm-hmm.
without this filter,
Mm-mm.
and the room to grow into who you will become, right?
Well,
Because then there's that piece where, oh, this person is identified and defined as this type of person.
right.
And then you have to never change.
Right. Well, and if you think about it, there was that list of words that CSU put out a year or so ago that could not be used on campus because they were considered to be sensitive words. And one of the words on there was American. And CSU,
Really?
you'll have to go Google
I
that
will.
story. Yeah.
Yeah.
CSU put out a list of words that they did not want students using on campus anymore because they had become sensitive terms. And some of the terms were he, she, him,
Yeah.
her,
Okay.
American, USA, those kinds of things were in there. And it was amazing when CSU got put under the hot plate and the reasoning behind some of them. And African American was one of them, I think. They didn't want people called, America. The thing was, they didn't want America being used because it presented the idea that the United States was the supreme power and there were more Americas, not just the United States. There was also, Canada is also in America, and Mexico is also in America.
Oh, okay.
And it gave
North
off this
America.
presentation that, and it was funny because I have very close friends who live in Canada, and when I asked them about it, she goes, yeah, last time I checked, I never told anybody I was Canadian American. When people ask who I am, I'm Canadian. I'm not Canadian American. You know what I mean?
Well,
So,
I'm Canadian as well. And, it's an interesting dynamic because, a lot of Canadians are projecting, and this is just, from what I've seen, projecting their fear into America.
mm-hmm.
Right? Because we have, for whatever reason, our numbers, because we have more people or whatever, but they're looking for a target to blame
Mm-hmm.
as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's, yeah.
It's interesting. How do people connect with you, Sherrie?
Oh, wow. There's a ton of ways. So I have 2 different Facebook pages because one of them is my body of work that I do for Complete Colorado.
Okay.
And you can find me at Complete Sherrie, and Sherrie is Sherrie. And then there's another page that I've just recently started up called Simply Sherrie.
Okay.
And that is going to be, it's a new page. It's a page where I'm putting all of my stuff, not just my Complete Colorado stuff, but opinion on there. There's Weld County specific. There's Larimer County specific. There's stuff that I can't put into Complete Colorado because I just can't fill up Complete Colorado with all this stuff.
Right.
And I don't do opinion for Complete Colorado. I do, fact-based stories for Complete Colorado. I'm not an opinion reporter. So I put my opinion there, and it's called Simply Sherrie, and it's just what it is. And again, it's SHERRIE, and that's where you can find pretty much all of my stuff. And like I said, that's a new page, so there's not a ton of stuff up there yet. Yeah. But what is up there is most everything that I've done on coronavirus. Nice. All of the daily numbers are there. Anytime there's something interesting that comes out, I'll post it there. I'll put opinions on coronavirus stuff there. That's kind of where that's become my landing page right now, is for coronavirus. But what it's intended to do is, I don't know if you know, but I also have gone through a period of change in the way I live my life health-wise.
Yes.
And I've lost over 100 pounds.
Yes.
I've kind of gone into a plateau for the last, thank you. I've plateaued the last few months just because of things that I haven't been able to do. And now because I can't get in the gym, but I am still losing. And so I had a page that was documenting that, and that all of this is going to kind of evolve into my website, which is simplysherrie.com. And you're going to be able to find all of me, the sports side of me, the weight loss side of me, the politics side of me, the mom side of me. So, and it's just Simply Sherrie. And because to me, I'm pretty simple. I put things simply, and I am what I am.
I would agree. What's your next piece? What are you working on?
I'm working on a couple of things right now. One is still following this thing that's going on in Weld County with the Safer at Work that the Weld County Commissioners put out. I'm following some strings of emails and stuff that the commissioners have gotten over that. I don't know if there's going to be a story there or not, but I'm looking into it because apparently there's been some folks within our community that think that, threatening commissioners is a good idea. So I'm following that. I know, right? And I'm also still on the broadband topic. I follow municipal broadband heavily. Obviously, it's been kind of on the back burner with COVID-19, right. But I am still looking into what's going on in all the different communities with their municipal broadband stuff. And as always, just anything and everything that pops up with the coronavirus, right. Kind of watching that and seeing where that's going. Not a lot on the plate right now, but it's just some stuff that takes a little while to look into.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for agreeing to come on here today. I hope that I think it was a really good discussion. And I think if anything, people maybe take a different look at the way they process information when they're looking through articles. Maybe they won't press the share button quite as quickly.
Right.
If they haven't vetted.
Zuckerberg will see this and go, oh, good idea. Let's get rid of the share button.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks for being on the Naturally Inspired podcast today.
Thank you.
If the Naturally Inspired movement makes sense to you, let's do this together and transform the medical model and help people take charge of their health. Learn more about how you can join the Naturally Inspired movement by going to naturallyinspiredadvocate.com or call me at 970-475-4862.